you ever noticed that the bass sound on the early Beatles records is kind of hard to hear?
Yep, it's pretty thin.
Back in the day when I had a graphic equalizer, I'd just push the left two levers all the way up.
Can't do that on your phone, huh? But there are some new remixes of Beatles songs that correctly boost the bass.
Are you talking about bootleg recordings?
No, I'm talking about official Beatles reissues.
Which is just fascinating, because if you were buying records back in the early 60s, the biggest enemy to your listening experience wasn't, like, bad equipment.
Yeah, not at all.
It was a guy in a crisp white lab coat who was absolutely terrified of your living room record player.
Right, the EMI engineers. That's the hidden history behind those original mixes, you know? When you put on a track like Please Please Me Today, you get hit with this raw lightning strike intensity.
Oh, yeah. The vocals just cut right through.
Exactly. The snare drum has this brilliant snap. But compared to what came just a decade later, I mean, think of a 1970s stadium anthem.
Like Kiss doing I Want to Rock and Roll All Night.
Yeah, perfect example. There is a missing physical sensation on those early 60s tracks. That 70s track has a chest-thumping low end that literally shakes the floorboards. But on early 60s tracks, the low end is practically a ghost.
It's incredibly frustrating when you picture the actual studio sessions. Because we've all seen those classic black and white photographs from Abbey Road, right?
With the tall acoustic baffles everywhere.
They're surrounded by them. They're trying to capture the sweaty energy of a live club gig while keeping the sound contained. And Paul McCartney's wearing those thick black glasses, just intensely focused,
Clutching his left-handed Rickenbacker bass.
laying down this heavy, driving groove right there in the room. But then on the record, it sounds like someone installed a governor on a sports car engine.
That is a great way to put it.
They're revving the engine, but the factory won't let it translate to the road. Why were they so restrictive?
Well, the EMI recording engineers were the ones installing that governor. And they did it out of sheer technological paranoia. In 1963, they suffered from what you could call needle jump anxiety.
Needle jump.
Yeah, because loud, low frequencies, they create wider, more aggressive physical vibrations in a vinyl groove.
Oh, right. So if that bass was too heavy, the stylus on a standard, cheap living room turntable would literally go airborne.
Exactly. It would bounce right out of the groove and skip across the record.
Wow.
So the mastering engineers, they would preemptively choke the low end before the sound ever hit the vinyl, just to accommodate bad record players.
That's wild. So producer George Martin was just stuck navigating this.
Pretty much. He was performing a constant high-wire act on these primitive two-track tape machines. He would put all the rhythm instruments on one track and all the vocals on the other.
Just to keep things separated.
Right. His primary goal was keeping the vocals crystal clear, because he knew if the low frequencies bled too much, the entire mix would turn into a muddy mess.
So listeners got a heavily managed, punchy mid-range sound, but no deep growl, which the band themselves absolutely hated, right?
No, they despised it.
Because they weren't making these records in a vacuum. They were actively listening to American records. Motown in particular already had this incredibly fat, driving, low-end sound.
Yeah, American studios were doing things totally differently.
And Paul would literally march into the studio carrying imported singles, play them for the engineers, and demand to know why their records couldn't sound like that.
Jean was just as incensed by it, too. But they were constantly fighting EMI's strict committee of standards.
The Committee of Standards, that sounds so bureaucratic.
It was. They favored safety over raw power. But that safety-first approach held them back for years. The breaking point finally arrives in 1966.
Because by then, they have unprecedented global leverage.
Exactly. The whole needle might jump excuse simply wasn't going to fly anymore. Paul explicitly demanded a beefier sound, pointing directly to Wilson Pickett Records as the new benchmark.
So how did they bypass that Committee of Standards? Because they used a brilliant, entirely illegal workaround, didn't they?
Yes. Recording engineer Geoff Emerick decided to completely rethink how they captured those low frequencies during the Paperback Writer sessions.
Oh, Paperback Writer. Such a great track.
He realized that a loudspeaker and a microphone are essentially the exact same piece of hardware, just operating in opposite directions.
Okay, wait. Explain that physics to me.
Think of it like an electric motor, right? If you plug a motor into the wall, the electricity spins the fan blades. But if you take that same motor outside and the wind spins the blades...
It generates electricity.
Exactly. It's completely reversible. Normally, a speaker takes an electrical signal and pushes air out. A microphone takes air pushed against a tiny diaphragm and turns it into an electrical signal.
But standard microphones back then would get overwhelmed by heavy low frequencies, right?
Yeah, the tiny diaphragm would just distort under the massive push of air from a bass amplifier.
So Emmerich took a second, large loudspeaker, wired it in reverse, and placed it directly in front of Paul's amplifier.
Yep. He ran the machine backwards so it acted as a giant microphone, easily absorbing that massive wave of air.
This is genius.
And Paperback Writer is widely considered the first time one of their records truly kicks. It signaled a massive shift in philosophy. Artistic impact finally took priority over technical paranoia.
So by the time they reached the Sgt. Pepper sessions, the low end had become a driving foundational force in the music.
Exactly.
But, that still leaves a glaring problem for listeners today. What about all the music recorded before 1966?
Right, the early stuff.
You can't just reverse a speaker to fix tape that was already recorded and glued together. For decades, those early tapes were permanently baked.
Yeah, 4 instruments bounced down to a single mono track meant their sound waves had literally merged into one complex waveform.
You couldn't just turn up Paul's track, because his instrument was fused to the drums and the rhythm guitars. Which brings up the modern miracle of artificial intelligence that makes these official reissues possible.
Enter Peter Jackson.
Right. Filmmaker Peter Jackson helped develop a groundbreaking AI technology nicknamed Mal-L.
Affectionately named after the band's legendary roadie, Mal Evans.
We first heard about this during the restoration of the Get Back documentary footage. They needed to isolate conversations from noisy background room chatter.
Yeah, they had all this messy audio.
But extracting a voice from background noise is one thing. Extracting a single bass note from a drum hit played at the exact same millisecond seems impossible. How does Mal actually do that?
Well, instead of looking at the audio as a single messy sound wave, Mal analyzes the audio spectrally. It maps out the frequencies visually, almost like a topographical heat map.
Oh, wow.
Because the AI has been trained on thousands of hours of isolated instruments, it knows the exact visual fingerprint of a snare drum versus the specific resonance of Paul's Rickenbacker.
So it's looking at the shape of the sound, identifying the specific pixels of the bass guitar on that heat map, and mathematically subtracting everything else.
It's essentially unbaking the cake.
That's wild.
And once those stems are digitally separated, producer Giles Martin, who is George Martin's son, can finally give the low end the volume and the power it always deserved.
I mean, listening to the 2023 version of I Saw Her Standing, there is an absolute revelation.
It finally has the thump that has been missing since the day it was recorded.
The philosophy of audio engineering has totally inverted. In the 1960s, the ultimate goal was clarity driven entirely by fear. Today, it's all about impact.
Yeah, modern producers know that low frequencies are the only part of the music you actually feel in your bones.
Listen to a modern track like Billie Eilish's Bad Guy. The low end isn't just a background rhythm keeping time. It is a distorted, driving physical force that dominates the song.
Oh, totally. If that Billie Eilish song had been pressed to vinyl in 1963, the EMI engineers would have had a collective breakdown.
The needle wouldn't have just jumped. It would have launched across the room.
Absolutely shattered the record player.
Okay, I need to jump in here and act as a consumer guide for you, the listener. Because finding these new mixes is actually a bit of a minefield.
Yeah, you have to know what you're looking for.
There is a serious streaming trap out there. If you just open up Apple Music or Spotify today, search for the album Please Please Me, and hit play, you are not hearing this new AI-separated audio.
No, you are hearing the 2009 remaster, which is just a cleaned-up, digitized copy of the original 1960s mix.
It still has the choked, thin sound, and you'll still hear the instruments panned aggressively to one side.
Exactly. To hear the fixed version, you have to look for specific keywords. You want the 2023 mix or 2023 remix.
And since those earliest albums haven't received their own dedicated Super Deluxe anniversary box sets yet, the only place to get those early songs with the updated heavy sound is on the expanded edition of the Red Album.
Right, the 1962 to 1966 compilation.
But be careful. If you buy a used CD or vinyl of the Red Album from 5 years ago, you are getting the old mixes. You must ensure you are specifically playing the 2023 edition.
It changes the entire experience of the music.
Let me push back on this whole endeavor for a second, though, from the perspective of historical preservation.
Okay, sure.
By fundamentally changing the balance of the instruments from how they originally sounded in 1963, aren't we destroying the historical document? We are essentially rewriting what the public heard when Beatlemania first exploded.
Yeah, I get that. And Giles Martin has actually addressed that purist perspective. His philosophy is that they aren't replacing the originals at all.
They're still out there.
Right. The 2009 remasters are permanently available. If you want the strict historical document, the audio exactly as it sounded when it left the factory with the governor on the engine, you can always listen to that.
So it's an alternative, not a replacement.
Exactly. The goal of the new 2023 mixes is to strip away the technological limitations of the era. The intent is to create a version that sounds like the band is actually standing in the room with you right now.
So it's not about rewriting the past. It's about finally realizing the sound they were desperately trying to achieve in that room before the white coat engineers stepped in.
Yeah, it's the sound of four guys pushing the limits of a studio to its absolute breaking point just to make you feel the rhythm.
And thanks to a bit of modern technology, that breaking point has finally been reached.
It's amazing what we can do now.
But, it does leave you with a wild thought to chew on. If this AI demixing technology can cleanly extract a single bass line from a 60-year-old mono tape, what happens when it gets turned loose on every piece of archival audio in existence?
Oh, the possibilities are endless.
We could soon be listening to isolated conversations from historic recording sessions, or stripping away the noise to hear every hidden mistake a famous musician ever made. We're entering an era where the mysteries of music history can be completely untangled and laid bare.
The studio is no longer a hiding place. Every note, every conversation, and every erased mistake might just be a software update away from being heard.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Whenever you feel like knowing more about the Beatles, visit us at BeatlesRewind.com. It's the Beatles, all day, every day, 8 days a week. Cass, we'll do it again tomorrow.
Right, absolutely. See you then.
Until next time.
Yeah.
When you listen.
Your mind adjusts its own equalizer.